So we're here in the matter of State of Georgia versus Claude McIver, indictment 17 SC 153902. On April 23rd, 1 month ago, the jury returned a verdict of guilty as to counts 2, 3, 4, and 5 for the indictment they had, but on the actual indictment it's 2, 3, 4, I think 7. But it's one of the influencing witnesses counts, and we'll need to work through that. Actually, it was 5, so that didn't change a whole lot. Today is the day we are going to work through the sentencing for Mr. McIver. I see we've got some prosecutors here. We have Mr. McIver's defense team. Mr. McIver is here. Good afternoon, sir. The way I'd like to do this, but I am open to suggestion if folks were envisioning something different, is that I'll start with the state, and I'd ask you all to tell me what you believe sentencing are, what the sentencing recommendation is from the state, and then if there's any presentation you intended to make. I don't quite know how victim impact would work in this case, but you're certainly entitled to present what you want to present in connection with your recommendation. I'll take all that, and then I will turn to the defense. We'll figure out who's going to be talking from the defense, see if they agree with what they think the sentencing options are, and then I'll give the defense a chance to present whatever they want to present, and then ultimately I'll see if Mr. McIver has anything he wants to say, and then I'll impose sentence. Does that format work for the state, Mr. Rucker?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Samuel, is that Mr. Harvey? That'll work? Okay. So Mr. Rucker, why don't you get us started, please?
Yes, sir. And good afternoon, Judge.
Good afternoon.
As the court has already noted, 1 month ago, the jury returned a verdict after almost 6 weeks of trial and more than 70 witnesses, over 500 pieces of evidence, and about 5 days of deliberation. We have a unanimous verdict that was properly accepted by the court. And that verdict was not guilty as to count 1, malice murder, and guilty as to count 2, felony murder, count 3, aggravated assault, count 4, possession of a firearm during the commission of a felony, and count 5 of influencing a witness. Understanding that count 2 carries a mandatory sentence of life in prison, the state would recommend and ask the court on count 2 to impose a sentence of life with the possibility of parole. Count 3, the aggravated assault, I believe merges into the count 2 and is vacated by operation of law, and therefore no sentence would be imposed on count 3. On count 4, the possession of a firearm during the commission of a felony, that charge carries a possible sentence of 1 to 5. We would ask the court to impose a 5-year sentence. We'd ask the court to run that 5-year sentence concurrent with count 2.
I don't think it can. I think it's not 1 to 5. It's just 5.
Right.
I think it has to run consecutive. But I can suspend it. I can probate it.
Right. I'm sorry. That was a misspoke. In count 5, the influence of a witness, that is 1 to 5. And I would ask the court to impose a 5-year sentence that runs concurrent with count 2. 5 years. I would ask you to run 5 years consecutive.
Consecutive. And probate, suspend, or 5 years to serve?
I would leave that to the court in its discretion.
Okay. Got it.
And as far as the presentation, Judge, the state will not present any evidence in aggravation. However, even though we understand with respect to the sentence to be imposed in count 2, we would ask the court to allow just a few victim impact statements in this case. And I had spoken with defense counsel prior to our hearing, and at that time felt like we would have one statement presented to the court, but I'm going to ask the court to please indulge the state and allow us to have Mr. Billy Corey address the court, Mr. Jay Grover, Miss Elaine Williams, and Danny Joe Carter.
Okay. That can happen in whatever order you elect.
Okay. Okay. Well, at this time, I guess if the court will allow the presentation of the impact statements, we would like to start with Mr. William Corey.
Okay. Mr. Corey?
Is the court's preference that he hear?
My preference is that Madam Court Reporter be able to hear it, and so if Mr. Corey wants to stand at the corner of the table and he can be heard, that's great. My recollection is that Mr. Corey and we'll be fine if he stands right there. If you prefer to be at the podium, sir, I'm not prohibiting you going to the podium. We just generally keep folks on different sides of the room. Okay. Do you want him up at the podium? Is that just going to be easier for you all around? Why don't we try this? Why don't you stand right there, Mr. Corey, and share what you want, and I'll reserve the right of politely interrupting you and getting you to the podium if we need to.
I want to thank you, Your Honor, for allowing me the opportunity to speak to the court in this sentencing hearing today. My name is Billy Corey. I'm the owner of U.S. Enterprises. Diane and I worked together over 40 years. She was a big part of the success of our companies. My life and the lives of all these people in this courtroom here, and McIver too, would never be the same. And Diane was more than just a co-worker. She was more than just a friend. She was the family matriarch and leader of U.S. Enterprises. Justice in this case, by virtue of the guilty verdict returned by the jury. This brilliant jury gave more than a month of their life for justice in this case. Diane's death was not an accident. The attorney's office conducted an exhaustive investigation and vigorously prosecuted this case. I would like to publicly thank District Attorney Paul Howard, Executive District Attorney Clint Rucker, and each and every one of his assistant district attorneys, investigators, staffers, and weekends to ensure justice was served in this case. Each of you stood up for Diane, and I am eternally grateful to you. God bless American justice. Rest in peace, Diane. Honor for giving this fair trial, both for the defense and the prosecution.
Thank you, Mr. Corey.
We'd like to hear from Mr. Jay Grover.
Mr. Grover. Here he comes.
My name is Jay Grover, and I'm a friend and co-worker of Diane's. I've known Diane for over 40 years. Her death left a huge void in the hearts and lives of many, and that void can never be filled. Professionally, Diane was the savviest, shrewdest, and smartest businesswoman I've ever known. She was fiercely competitive, and when she set her mind to do something, she was relentless in achieving her goal. She was driven. She had a sharp tongue and a sharp wit, but anyone who truly knew Diane also knew of her concern and compassion for her close friends and co-workers. Billy Corey was the mentor, and Diane was the mentee. The saying that was most often used by those in the know was, "Diane is Billy Corey trained." She was the yin to his yang, the up to his down, the circle to his square, but what were seemingly opposite or contrary forces were actually very complementary, interconnected, and interdependent. They were a team. In business, make no mistake that he was the patriarch. Conversely, Diane was the matriarch. Our company, U.S. Enterprises, serves as the flagship for a complement of more than a half dozen subsidiaries. The complexion of our company has changed immensely since Diane's death. The decision was made to sell our most publicly recognizable assets, our airport advertising company and our billboard advertising company. The sale of these two companies had a deep and lasting effect on most, if not all, of our employees. It affected employees and their families from coast to coast and across our nation, and at our offices in Palm Springs, California, to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, and from Dallas, Texas to Buffalo, New York, and of course, right here in Atlanta, Georgia. The lives of these employees, most of whom were directly hired, at least hired by Diane, are forever changed. Most of these employees and many of our joint venture partners traveled to Atlanta to attend Diane's celebration of life at our company headquarters to pay their respects to a woman and leader that they loved and admired. Employees and their families' lives were changed because of the intentional action of Lee McIver. His actions and one shiny silver bullet. The intentional actions of this now convicted murderer. Diane's loud and boisterous laughter will no longer be heard in the hallways of Corey Center. We will no longer experience Diane holding court in her elegantly decorated office while commanding the attention of Mr. Corey, Brig, Angie, Ken. We will no longer see Mommy Di's eyes light up and see a smile spread across her face when her beloved godson, Austin, runs into the room. Dan, Joe, and Janie will no longer have their best girlfriend to share their innermost thoughts and secrets with. Doc Felton and Cassie and Christy and I will no longer have our favorite partner in crime to sing way too loudly and way off key with at concerts, especially at Luke Bryan concerts, by far Diane's favorite country singer. Nana, James, Wanda, Javier, and Sonia, and their kids will no longer have their greatest ally and protector, Diane, to reach out to in their time of need or comfort. The intentional actions of Claude Lee McIver and one shiny silver bullet caused grief, heartache, pain, despair, and left a huge void in the hearts and lives of many that can never be filled. Claude Lee McIver.
So, Mr. Grover, and anyone who follows is pretty important. Talk to me. Don't talk to anyone else in the courtroom. This is a chance to share with me what you think I ought to do, how this situation has affected you and folks close to you and Ms. McIver.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Stacy Lane Williams.
Good evening, Your Honor.
Hello, Ms. Williams.
I hope mine will be in line. It's short and it's brief. As a minister, I realize when we say goodbye to one another, we never know if it's going to be our last. I'm still haunted by the look on her face that Friday, and will never know what she was really feeling. First, I want to say that I have come to a place in my heart, and I have found peace and forgiveness. And I hold no anger or hostility towards anyone. However, I would like for it to be known that a hole has been left in my heart, and the heart of those who remember her. The actions have traumatized me. I lost sleep because I so wanted to believe that it was an accident. No or consideration shown for her employees. We never got any explanation. We never got I'm sorry. We were never even told personally that I loved her and that I would never do anything to hurt her. She deserved so much better. As an adopted family member of 20 years, I was never given a final opportunity to say goodbye or farewell. We never knew when she was cremated, where her service. I read it in a newspaper. I would think after 20 years, someone would have compassion and say, there's going to be a service. Everyone's not going to be invited, but I would like you to know that she is going to be put at rest. And that final words could have been said, even from my desk. I was never allowed that opportunity. Diane and I shared many plans and made few plans for the future that I will now have to continue on without her. She will only see them come to pass from a distance now. The president of my company was not just taken away, but someone very special, someone that was loved, so full of life, a friend and a confidant. Because of the way her remains were handled, I have no closure. It's as if she said goodbye to me on Friday afternoon and simply walked out into space, never to be seen or heard from again. She deserved so much better. However, there is no victory or rejoicing here today. One life was lost, so many left hurting, a family shattered, and a bright future destroyed. With that, I can only pray God's mercy on us all, and that we all come to find peace in this situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Williams.
And Daniel Carter.
Thank you, Judge McBurney, for allowing me to do this.
Ms. Carter, that ends up being too difficult. You can always have the victim witness advocate lead it on your behalf.
Thank you.
You bet.
Tex McIver lied to me and tried to get me to lie. His friends tried to intimidate me and insult me. He tried to use me and an innocent 11-year-old boy to make himself look more likable. It didn't work. I would like to say that I forgive him for the tragedy of Diane's life. I cannot live with the resentment, nor is it my place to judge. Diane's friends appreciate the jury, the judge, McBurney, and everyone at the district attorney's office for their tireless dedication in this. This has been one of the saddest and most horrific incidents that's happened in my life. To have lost my friend of over 40 years that was more like a sister than a friend has broken my heart. Lost is the friend that I ran all of my important decisions by. The friend you call when something amazing or something bad happens. I still start to call her, to talk to her, and I have to stop. I dream about her often. To have been present at the time of her murder has caused me great distress and horrible trauma in my life. Diane was a unique woman with many great qualities. She was smart, beautiful, challenging, loving, and fun. The perfect balance of toughness and tenderness. I loved her. Her family loved her like blood. I miss her terribly. And I believe that Diane is in a better place now, free from conflict, evil, and innuendo. I will see her there one day. And in the words of Mr. Clint Rucker, I stand for Diane. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Carter. Mr. Rucker, anything else on behalf of the state?
No, sir.
All right. Thank you. Defense. Ms. Clark Palmer. So,
Want me to start with the sentence?
sentencing options. Tell me what you think the options are, and then from there, whether you want to do a recommendation or have people talk, you can do that however you want. I just want to make sure we're all working from the same space.
I agree with Mr. Rucker on count 2.
A bunch of letters that were submitted on behalf of Mr. McIver. I know the state received them as well, so we're all looking at the same things. And I have reviewed all but 2 of them, so I'm happy to, in the time that I had, I'm happy to look at the last 2 at some point, but I have processed most of those.
I've got one more to hand up to the court. I think you'd be able to review it very quickly.
Okay.
And I'll let Mr. Rucker look at it while I'm speaking, because I have not given him a copy of that one yet. Your Honor, I agree that this is a very sad day for everybody involved, including my client, Mr. McIver. I think it's a sad day for Diane's friends and the people who consider her family, as well as Tex's friends and family who are here. I think it is most sad for Tex McIver, in part because you have to sentence him to a life sentence in prison, and given his age, it is likely that he will never leave. Obviously, we disagree with the jury's verdict, but their verdict has taken away any meaningful discretion from the court. So that's why I'm looking for life with the possibility of parole sentence. But I don't think that that is the only reason that this is an incredibly sad day for Mr. McIver. He also misses Diane. As you heard during the trial, Diane was his wife, his best friend, his lover, his soulmate. And he killed her. And he has to live with that, and has lived with that since she died. And even if he had been acquitted by the jury, he would have lived with that guilt with the rest of his life, for the rest of his life. You heard from many witnesses about the wonderful relationship that they had, and that was not disputed by anyone. We had Janie Calhoun, Rachel Stiles, Roland, and even Danny Jo Carter, who told the court and the jury that Tex and Diane had a relationship to be envious of. During the trial, you didn't hear so much about Tex McIver himself, and that's why we provided the letters to the court that we did this morning. In the trial, we heard a little bit about his military background and his professional life, but not too much, so I wanted to flesh that out just a little bit. We provided the court more than a dozen letters from friends, family, people who have known him for a very long time. One of the other letters I've got here today to present to the court is from Richard Brock, who is in the Air Force and has known Tex since 1970. So I wanted to just sort of pull out some of the things that struck me when I was reading the letters that we provided to the court. Ann Schwall wrote a letter to the court, and she described Tex as being full of love and patient and kind. And she talked about his work as a mentor at the college in Milledgeville. His friend Billy Brown called him courteous, respectful, and a true gentleman. And his younger sister Dixie, who's here today and was here for, I think, all of the trial, or at least most of it, told you that she looks up to Tex and is extremely proud of him, not just because he is her big brother, but because of the selflessness that he exhibited in volunteering and doing things for other people. She talked about his work volunteering at the Children's Hospital, and that was echoed by his friend Dr. Ken Hoos, who told you about Tex establishing the Friends of Lakeside program for the local public high school where Dr. Hoos's and Tex's children attended. That also is mentioned in Richard Brock's letter. He said that he lived for Tex for a year when they were in the military in Vietnam together, and he found Tex to be a compassionate person, and that Tex befriended many of the local people that worked around their office, got to know their family history, and would give them money and financial assistance if any of them were having a family emergency. Sheriff Howard Sills, who's the sheriff out in Putnam County, described Tex as being quiet, refined, and humorous. And he too talked about Tex's involvement in their out there. Tex on the authority and bringing businesses with new jobs to Putnam County. And then another wrote that Tex has always been an achiever, that he was an Eagle Scout when he was 18 years old, class president in high school, college, and then went to in the Air Force and in law school. And his other family members, like his daughter-in-law Leslie, wrote extensively about his passion towards other people, echoed by her husband, who is Robbie McIver, Tex's son, who said that his father is always giving back to his community, providing financial assistance to others, donating vehicles or providing jobs, doing things to help the people around him. And then there were letters from Trent Lofton and his wife Leslie Lofton, who considered Tex basically to be like a second father to them, so much so that he became the father of their son. And then, as you know, he's the godfather to Austin Schwall as well. And everybody above all letters talked about Tex's love for Diane and their wonderful relationship. So I wish I could ask the court to do more in terms of the sentence, but we are where we are. And so I think that Mr. McIver would like to address the court now.
Okay.
And I'll hand up this last letter that Mr. Ruckers had a chance to read.
Okay, take that. Thank you.
If you want him to just stand here, is that okay? Or?
If we can hear you, Mr. McIver, from right there, that's great. If it's hard for the court reporter to hear you, we'll get you over to the podium, but let's try it right there, please.
Well, given these shackles, if you don't mind, I would like to sit.
That's okay.
Thank you. The limited time I have here today, I'd like to use notes if that's possible. I find that without notes, I'm more emotional and not broken up, so it might be more cogent for you. I would like to use those. And for really two different purposes. One is that I've received a tremendous amount of mail challenging our system and asking why I am not a champion of some challenge of that system. I'd like to just very briefly describe, if I'm ever allowed to respond, how I would do so. And then I want to close by thanking those who've been great supporters of mine. And I'll do that in the most efficient way. The outpouring of support has been beyond anything that any of us expected. A month ago this trial occurred, and last week on one given day I received 11 different pieces of mail. And yesterday I received 11 different pieces of mail from from individuals on 3 different continents. One I would like to point out is it seems to be fairly common. It's a lady from Ireland. Her name is Deidre Kenny from Dublin, Ireland. And she says, "Dear Mr. McIver, you do not know me, but I watched your trial online and I wanted to write to offer you my support. The injustice done to you is shocking. Your sister gave me your address. Know that a lot of people see through these lies. Thank you." For some reason, that seems to be the outpouring that I'm finding. And I would like to at least refer to a couple of people who are offshore that have been so faithful in supporting me. Of course, this lady, then there's Maria Schneider that sends me recipes. If she knew anything about the quality of food in jail, she'd never do that because it's more punishing than it is helping. But again, she's very supportive in that respect. Then there is the most unique individual I think that I've ever corresponded with. His name is Trent Jones. He's a racehorse jockey in Perth, Australia. And his girlfriend was killed in a very tragic accident. As we saw the trial, decided to begin corresponding with me, and it's been very helpful as we have jointly through correspondence more. But what is unique about him is that his favorite racehorse, Hobart, has been retired just this year, and that now he and Hobart are free to step into the surf in Perth and play as they were unable to do in Perth when Hobart was running. They always ask that I pass that along to others as well. In addition to those that I have never met, I have a list that I won't bore the court with of about 60 individuals locally that have been very helpful to me in terms of their support. Neighbors bringing me food while I was in house arrest, friends delivering Chick-fil-A, one of my huge favorites, one of the things I miss the most, I guess, about the food in jail. But they've been remarkably kind to me. Even non-lawyers are offering to write amicus briefs, which I find to be a little bit astounding. But I trust they'd be usually influential with you in that respect. But nonetheless, those people are very, very important to me, and all of that is heartfelt, especially, I'm sure, a number of those people in the room today. Also, second to last, both blood and extended grandchildren who send me drawings with me as a hero and a picture story they've drawn, and hoping to see me soon. Some are in California, which is a long way, but we don't get together near enough. Then I'm the proud godfather of 3 children, as best I've been able to reconstruct and remember. Not the least of whom is Austin, that we heard something about. Austin and Diane and I, he was permanent part of our relationship. We were there, we held him when he was born. When his mother became ill, we took him and did all the 4 o'clock feedings and so on, and did some very serious bonding with him at the time. Through some small amount of influence from Diane and myself, he today is still a straight A student. He's an all-star on his basketball and baseball leagues. His first all-star baseball game is on Saturday, and he asked if anybody in the office would like to attend. He'd be happy to have him come. He's the only left-handed pitcher on the team. And he's a huge fan of the Golden State Warriors. He said, if anything, I had to say go Warriors before this statement was over with. I'm not sure how I'm going to accommodate missing him as much as I do, because he was such an integral part of our relationship. And then finally, under family, would be Tammy Johnson, who's the lady that's coordinated for us and helped me get through the changes that I'm going to have to make in my life. Extremely valuable person. And then we've heard about my sister. And to correct Amanda just mildly, I don't think Dixie, my sister, missed a day at the trial. She's from Texas. She leads a very active and busy life there. She tore that life apart, came here to assist me in lots of ways. She's been here for the last week, helping with some other things involving my estate, to the extent that I die in prison, and helps constantly. She's filled with unfettered love, and I'd like to proclaim, as I've done many times before, she is America's last living saint. And I would hope that others would appreciate her for that. Last, I want to thank what I refer to, and many people in this room have heard me refer to as my Diane. I found it very painful to hear her described in the trial in some ways that I simply didn't know who that person was. And clearly, as the president of an organization at the office, I'm sure it's necessary, because I was the leader in my firm, that you need to be firm, you need to be difficult sometimes, you need to be ardent, but that wasn't my Diane. The luckiest day of my life was when Diane chose me. And in doing so, we started a relationship that was can only be described as amazing. We loved each other like small children, unabashedly devoted to each other and so on. What many people could not possibly know, because it's never been revealed, and I'm going to give up the secret today. We felt so strongly about each other, we were together so much, that we actually had a secret among us. And that was that we would be different places, we'd look at each other, and we would say, sometimes even in unison, is this truly real? Is this real? And it was one of those, if it's not real, don't pinch me, because this is the greatest dream I've ever had and I don't want to wake up. But is this real? And we, for example, would go to the Christmas dinner, the annual Christmas dinner hosted by Kathy and Ken Rickard. We'd be in their home, they'd retire to the kitchen to prepare the meal and to serve it to us, and we'd look at each other and almost repeat in unison, is this truly real? We just couldn't believe it was that good. And we found that that was the case in so many instances. In fact, it became, if people are able to believe it, telepathic. I could be on the other side of a room in an event, or I could be busy in our cow pasture, and my conscience would hear these words, is this truly real? I would spin around, look to where she was, see her gaze, and know that she had telepathically communicated those words to me. Is this truly real? And that I found to be so very moving in that respect. At any rate, I have to tell you, I even confounded the preacher that married us. He was a 30-year client and friend. And as he's delivering his words in the marriage, I look at her and say, and mumble, is this truly real? After the ceremony, he said to me, were you questioning the authenticity of the ceremony that I was providing and so on? It was like that. And she was like a little girl growing up in Alabama with a new pink dress, looking to just show it off and please people. That was my Diane. My Diane was very different from those described. And I, of course, will miss her so. There just aren't words to describe the nature of our relationship, the energy we derive from each other, and so on. And on the guidance of counsel, I'll not go further down that road, because I don't want to impinge upon their ability to obviously have a good exchange in terms my appeal. Yes, it is true. Some of whom have spoken have seen that she delivered to me what she called adjustments. I call them corrections. But from time to time, she would become frustrated with me, as I think all women do with their relationships. Why is that? It's my belief that guys are just generally dumb when it comes to maintaining quality relationships. We just genetically don't have a feel for what's the right thing to do for a relationship. And in that respect, those corrections delivered by her, sometimes in front of others, were of the type that they were always delivered with love. They fostered our dream, and for that very reason, I always accepted them with love, because they were important to me in that respect. But in my view, and I don't have any memory of us ever crossing bad words among us. I would receive the corrections and go forward. I don't ever remember a time I was critical of her in that respect. That was the nature of our devotion to each other. Since this tragedy, I have spent 263 nights in a jail cell by myself, but not alone. She has joined me there. It's a presence, it's hard to describe, but she has left her earth suit, and after the three different ceremonies we had for her, two in Atlanta for Celebration of Life and one in Texas for Celebration of Life, where we tried to say goodbye to her, she never said goodbye to me. And she's been there. It's as if she's on the other side of a curtain or in another dimension. It really is true that if you're that close to each other, and this is obviously my first experience with it, that they are there. They are absolutely there, and I've never felt alone in that respect. It has meant so much to me in that way. On this earth, she was my life and made me complete. I'm certainly not that way now. If I speak her directly, because I know she's here, I feel her presence as I speak to her words. Darling, you have brought me more joy and fulfillment that few men on this earth have ever known. Thank you until we are together again, because it is truly real. It is truly real. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McIver. Ms. Clark Palmer, anything else?
We don't have anything else.
Okay. So, as Mr. Rucker observed at the beginning, this was a long trial. It lasted many weeks. I didn't know it was that many witnesses. It felt like more, but that's still a big number. As Mr. Corey observed, we had a jury that listened and watched and paid attention to what was presented by both sides over these many weeks. And there was a presentation, a robust presentation from both sides. And this jury, along with the attorneys and Mr. McIver and perhaps Mr. McIver's sister, really the only people, with all due respect to Ireland and Australia, etc., who absorbed all of the evidence that was presented in this case. It's helpful to have the armchair jurists who, after the fact, say this is how it should have played out or that. It was a miscarriage of justice, or it was the right answer, or this or that. What the jury said in the end was that it was not an accident. The jury concluded that you, Mr. McIver, intentionally pulled the trigger of that firearm, not with the intent to kill your wife and the family matriarch for Corey Enterprises, but that you intentionally pulled the trigger. And they delivered a verdict that supported that conclusion. I do believe, consistent with what Ms. Clark Palmer said, that if you in fact love Diane McIver as much as you've just shared with me, and others have shared with me through the letters and what we heard at trial, then there really isn't a form of punishment that any judge could impose that would be more severe than the burden of knowing that you took Diane McIver from all of us. I didn't know her before the trial. I feel like I know more about her, but it's clear in listening to Mr. Corey and Mr. Grover and Ms. Williams and Ms. Carter and others who testified during the trial that she was family to those people. As we mean that term, not a blood relative, but just as much as a blood relative. And you took Diane McIver from all of them as well. Their loss in many ways is the same. I'll tell you what's most telling. You had as much time as you wanted to share with me what you thought was important for me to hear, and I guess your audience to hear. We heard about racehorses in Australia, and Chick-fil-A, and telepathy, a brief psychoanalysis of the male ego and ghosts. I didn't ever hear you say you're sorry for what you did. To me, that silence speaks volumes. Mr. McIver, the sentencing options are largely determined by the legislature in this case. The penalty for felony murder is life. I'm going to sentence you, count 2, to a term of life with the possibility of parole. Count 3 merges into count 2. Count 4 must run consecutive to count 2. It must be 5 years. I will suspend those 5 years. Count 5 is a range of 1 to 5. Excuse me. I will sentence you to 5 years to serve. That will run concurrently with count 2. The sentence I just intended to pronounce is a sentence of life plus 5 with those 5 years suspended. Mr. McIver, you have a host of appellate rights that I trust you already understand, but I need to get on the record and have you acknowledge that you understand at least my presentation. You have the right to a motion for new trial. When attorneys, likely different attorneys, you'll decide whether you use the same attorneys or not, but if you use the same attorneys, they can't argue that they were in any way ineffective. I'm not suggesting they were, but that's often an argument that's made. If you want to seek a motion for a new trial, which if granted would do exactly what it says, it would grant you a new trial, then a notice, a placeholder motion for a new trial must be filed within 30 days of entry of the final disposition, and it will be entered today. So a clock will start to tick today. And within 30 days, one of the attorneys representing you now will need to file that placeholder that will freeze the clock. And then you can work through who will represent you for the motion for new trial, should you choose that. You have the absolute right to counsel for a motion for new trial, and so if you are not able to afford counsel, counsel will be appointed to represent you. You also have the right to a direct appeal, which, given these charges, likely would go to the Supreme Court, although they keep changing what they're going to consider and what they delegate to the Court of Appeals. Regardless, you have the right to a direct appeal if you choose to skip the motion for new trial or if the motion for new trial is denied. And you have right to counsel for that direct appeal as well. So if you cannot afford counsel, counsel will be appointed to represent you. Within that 30-day window that begins today after the final disposition is entered, you either need to have your counsel file that motion for new trial, placeholder, or a notice of appeal that you're, for whatever reason, foregoing the motion for new trial and are electing to have your appeal docketed soon with an appellate court of some sort. If such a notice or such a motion isn't filed within that 30 days, you run the risk of waiving those appellate rights. You also have the right to what's called a habeas challenge, a collateral attack on your conviction and your sentence. Those rights don't accrue until after you have exhausted all of your direct appeal rights. So if you have your attorneys file a motion for new trial and or pursue a direct appeal, you don't need to worry about the habeas rights for a while, but you should know that you have 4 years from the date that your conviction and sentence become final, either because you don't challenge them or because after this case works its way up through whatever line of direct appeals you choose to pursue. If the conviction and sentence are affirmed and upheld, then you have a 4-year window in which to file a collateral attack. You do not have a right to counsel for that. You certainly can retain counsel, but counsel will not be appointed to assist you with the habeas. Do you have any questions that I might be able to help with in connection with your appellate rights?
No, sir.
Okay. Mr. Samuel, and I'm speaking to you and the entire team, but through you to the entire team, will you consult with Mr. McIver and exercise his direction as to what would happen next on the appellate front, even if you aren't staying in the case?
We have and we will.
Okay. To add in connection with your client's appellate rights?
No, Your Honor.
Okay. Mr. Rucker, anything else before we are finished?
No, sir.
Any objection to the manner in which I imposed the sentence?
No, sir.
Ms. Clark-Palmer, any objection to the sentence as imposed?
No, Your Honor.
Okay. Thank you.